Hey, everybody. We're going to get going. We've lost one of our panelists. So, yeah, she was here earlier, Zwen. So hopefully by the time we get to introducing her, she'll be back from wherever. So I'm going to let Julie and Francie kick it off.
You want to start? Okay. We'll move over here because you guys are all like standing in the corner. Hey, welcome to the BayCHI Design Research Birds of a Feather. Great turnout. Thanks for coming, even though it's sort of like rainy and wet out. BayCHI is I can't have to explain what it is. I don't know. BayCHI is like this big organization. The second Tuesday of every month, I think, they have talks at Park that you can go to. You should join and be a member. You can do it online. That's the easiest way to do. If you go to the BayCHI website and look for the membership stuff, you can now pay by PayPal and do all those things a lot more modern and easier. If you really want to mail them a check, you can do that too. And we run the design research BOF, which happens whenever we feel like it. So if you are interested in presenting or hosting, we would love to hear from you. You can look up me, Julie, or Francie on the website, or just come find us afterwards and talk to us. We're happy to help you organize an event. And Francie wanted to ask a couple questions.
Yeah. So thank you. We're one of the kind of affinity groups, and our particular group, or Birds of a Feather group, started out being called the Usability Engineering BOF, and then we changed our name to the Design Research BOF a few years ago to reflect the kind of current state of what people actually do in their professions in this field, and especially out here in the Bay Area. But we have a lot of different kinds of people who attend our events. It's a wonderful opportunity both at the BOF events as well as at the larger community, the main monthly meetings, to network and get to know people in many different roles within product, within design, within research, within a lot of different types of roles. There's opportunities to volunteer and many different topics of interest. So we hope you will look into joining the larger organization. There's also a wonderful jobs list and many different benefits of being a part of the organization, and volunteering is always a welcome part. So we'd like to take a quick poll of what kinds of folks are attending this evening. So would you mind raising your hand if you are somebody who does design research or UX research or market research? Okay, great. Okay, and then what if you're not a researcher? Raise your hand. Okay, right. And are any folks here designers? Okay. And what about product manager? No? Okay. And what about other? Okay, we've got a few others. Nice. Okay, great. Well, that kind of helps our wonderful panelists to understand a little bit more about who their audience is as well. And I'm going to bring the mic back to Kari to introduce the panel and facilitate this conversation.
All righty. Thank you. So thanks, everybody, for coming out. It's been a little over a year since we've hosted one of these, and so it's good to be meeting here again. So I wanted to share a little bit about how we got to Boo Hiss Personas. I started here at Chegg in 2014, and 2015, I had a couple new product managers ask me can we do personas? So I said, okay. So we spent 6 months creating these personas, and we thought they were great. And then that was where it ended. They never really saw the light of day after that, but we checked it off our list. And so from that time on, I realized just personally, anytime anyone asks for personas, I was like, and I was making joke. I can make this joke because there's no PMs here, I think. I was like, I think it's in the PM handbook on, during your first week of work, ask for personas. It will make you look smart. So, so I started asking some of you who are here tonight and just other colleagues, hey, what do you guys think about personas? And I was really amazed at the number of negative responses I got about personas. And so I was talking to my team about it a couple months ago, and I'm like, hey, you guys, it seems like personas are getting a really bad rep. And then Katie said, boo, hiss personas. then that's when we said, oh, we got to do a panel on this. So, and rather than have it be negatively focused, let's find some people who have had success with personas. And that brings us to introductions. So, to my right, we have Zuen Zhao. She's a senior researcher at Robinhood. It's a fintech startup company that started with commission-free stock trading, and it's on a mission to democratize the American financial systems. Before Robinhood, she worked at Facebook, Twitter, and Microsoft Research. I've heard of a few of those before. She has a long history of researching digital identity, privacy, and personal informatics. She's a big fan of mixed methods, and she loves people and cats. Next, we have Paige Bennett, senior design researcher at Dropbox. She previously created strategic research projects at Medium and was the first user researcher at Weight Watchers. Fun fact, Paige began her career as a TV news reporter before moving to the Middle East to conduct field research in the Gulf. Welcome, Paige. And then we have Nikki. Nikki Knox leads the experience research team at Weight Watchers, where she focuses on how people think and feel along their weight loss journey. Prior to Weight Watchers, she provided user research consulting to companies like Clorox, Intuitive Surgical, Kiva, and Wikipedia. In addition, she's taught and written curriculum for many of Cooper's workshops. Fun fact, outside of work, she specializes in toddler wrangling and cooking. And then finally, in the magic of AV, we have Indy Young joining us from, can you see us, Indy?
Yes.
Oh, good, okay. She is in San Rafael. It is a bad night to try to drive down from San Rafael. So Indy's been doing UX research since before it was a thing. With over 25 years experience in various consulting roles, she has a wealth of knowledge and good stories, not only about co-founding the well-known consultancy and UX think tank Adaptive Path, but also the conception of mental model diagrams. And she's also written 2 books about this method, Mental Models and Practical Empathy. Fun fact, Indy is committed to eating 4 ounces of dark chocolate every day. All right, welcome panelists, welcome everyone, and I'm going to hand this over to Katie, one of my senior user researchers. I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm just like so excited to get going on. I've been in the house for 2 weeks recuperating, so this is my first time out in 2 weeks. I'm like, woo, people. So I'm Kari Peterson. I run the user research group here at Chegg, and this is Katie. And Katie actually was on the panel here, the last panel that we did here in November, and now she's working here. Imagine that. So Katie, take it away.
Thank you. And it's really weird to be on this side, even though it's the same side. It feels like a different side, but it's also great. And I'm really looking forward to a positive evening. And when I say positive, I don't just mean the opposite of boo-hiss, but I also mean constructive. And so what I really was hoping for is for us to learn from people's experience on how they've typically used the personas and how they've created personas. And so I've kind of segmented this panel into several sections, and the sections kind of reflect the journey of a persona from creation to dissemination. So let's go ahead and start it off with, first of all, what is a persona? What the heck are they? How do you define personas? And you ask 100 researchers, you're going to get 200 answers. So, but let's ask a few right now. So we'll go ahead and start with Indy. How do you define personas?
Excellent. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We'll work on it. We'll work on it.
Okay, very good. I'll keep talking then while you work on it. Yeah, so personas are a many varied thing, and they have been getting a bad rap because they haven't been created correctly. I think people have taken a lot of big shortcuts. Can I say that? Big shortcuts? Anyway, long day. If you want to advance the slide, I want to kind of predicate all that I'm going to say Oh, we still can't hear me. There we go. Okay. Can we hear me now?
Okay, just a second, Indy. We're just going to work on the audio for a second.
Okay, all right. I will pause. Should I keep talking every once in a while just to hear if, or see if you hear me? Still no hearing. I can see Paige shaking her head every once in a while. La, la, la. You could start with somebody else who is there, although I just need to check the audio.
Yeah, let's go ahead and circle back to Indy, and we'll go ahead and start with Nikki's slides. So hang on.
Can you hear me? Okay, so can you go back one before this? So I learned about personas from Alan Cooper, who likes to let everybody know that he's the founder and creator of personas. So I feel like I'm kind of a snob when it comes time to personas, but over the years of using them with different clients, I feel like the best way to describe them is as a communication tool, one of many. And for me, they are very effective at communicating behavioral patterns that we notice within a market segment. So we work with our market research or insights team to determine what those market segments are, and then we looked for those distinct behavioral patterns within them, because in order for our product designers to be able to make detailed UI decisions, they need to understand detailed behavioral patterns beyond the demographics, beyond purchasing, messaging that usually come with market research. Part of the challenge is that in my opinion, market research teams can get very creative with their market segments and elaborate them so much that they sound like personas until you try to actually use them to make a product design decision. And that's where they start to fall apart. So when I came to Weight Watchers, they said, oh, we already have personas, and they're already done. And Paige was a large part of that, but a lot of them tied back to the market segments, and it turns out we needed to be a lot more specific. So on the next slide, on the left, you'll see an example of one of several of our personas. This is probably what you most likely associate Weight Watchers with. Older woman in their like 40s to 60s that have been introduced to Weight Watchers and are fans. And this is a poster that we created and posted around the office, but it goes into what are their primary goals. So what is unique about her weight loss journey to Jennifer? And for Jennifer, her core need is that she has struggled with weight loss since she was a child. So she's never been skinny. She's always wrestled with her self-image and having extra weight. And so she tends to be a little hesitant and needs a lot of support and help in dealing with her weight loss and in making decisions about how to best manage it. So we try to summarize in the orange line there what the core product design need is, in case our designers and PMs forget everything we tell them. Remember this, like that she needs consistent and strong support throughout her weight loss journey. So always assume that she needs more information, she needs more help than you think that she does. That's what we like to tell our designers. And then we have the journey map that helps articulate what her journey is like over time and the phases that we notice that people go through on their weight loss journey. And of course, this is just Jennifer. We have 4 or 5 now. And we like to, another key thing that personas help us with is having discussions around who are we targeting for a feature or a certain product. Are we targeting Jennifer with this? Are we targeting one of the other ones like Vanessa? Because if so, we might approach that feature very differently. And later on in this panel, there's a section on how they inform products, so I'll come back to that. But we have a conversation around who is our primary target. So To summarize, before hopefully it works for Indy, they're a communication tool that helps us articulate a behavioral pattern, and they help us have discussions around who we should target for design decisions. Not for marketing, that's a different target altogether, but who do we need to target as far as their needs and pain points when we're doing design, because they conflict, and you need to decide who to prioritize for. So that's that.
Great. Indy, are you?
Can you hear me now?
Excellent. Yeah. And before you go ahead and talk, I think you guys were right. I think we did actually overlook introducing you. So this is we did introduce you. Okay. I swear, there's like a black hole in my head right now. But okay, let's go ahead and circle back to Indy. So here we go.
Okay. So that was very cool, Nikki, and very impressive that that you learned from the master. That's really cool. One of the things that you mentioned was that personas are for communication, and one of the things that I'm kind of working on in parallel, because I don't necessarily always work in personas, is using these kinds of segments to have people recognize their assumptions. So I've got a picture of Renee, inviting her to the party here. And then, you know, this idea of like, that's just diversity. That's just having people here. But if you actually include them, you need to, you know, involve them. And how are you going to involve them in your app if you don't know them, if you don't research them? We can go to the next slide. Just wanted to sort of have that as a preface. So what I'm interested in is trying to head off thinking like this, thinking where you're making all these demographic assumptions about the people that you're serving. This was a tweet that somebody said after I had done this tweet saying, hey, please take demographics out of your personas. And then in this long Medium post that you might want to take a look at, I explain all the reasons why and then how to put them back in again. And the whole point here that Matt's saying is like, oh man, I have nothing to do, you know, nothing in common with this person. But in terms of context, he might. Like, for example, maybe they're both studying for a math test, and then maybe they have the similar studying habits, and maybe they'd use some sort of similar studying approaches. So it really depends on context. You can't just have a blanket statement like this that, oh, demographically we're different, and therefore we're completely different people. So I'm trying to head off this typical thinking, which I think is why I bring personas, what personas do for me. And I'll show you in the next phase of this panel tonight. But on the next slide, one of the things, so this kind of differentiates what I do from what the Cooper personas are. The Cooper personas are actual characters like Jennifer with a name and a face and ages and kind of a history. And they're meant to, with a mature team, be someone to keep in mind as you're making design decisions. Also to note what Nikki was saying about they're not a marketing segment, they're a usage segment. A marketing segment is maybe a buying decision segment. So I've got a bunch of examples of how you might cross-reference your usage segments with your buying segments just to make those marketing people feel a little bit more relaxed about it being included. But anyway, the thing that I run into is I'll get clients coming and they're like, oh yeah, hey, I've got these personas, and it's actually the same persona, but they did a caricature, and here's this persona as a woman, and here's this persona as a person of character, and there's really not that much difference. Or they've maybe tokenized, hey, we need to include a person of color. We haven't done any research, but we're just going to like paint this person in this way demographically. So these are the risks. A mature team does it really carefully and all completely based on data. The stuff that I do are called behavioral audience segments, or I'm calling them thinking style segments. So I actually don't use names or faces, like no demographics like that, unless I mean it, unless it's a situation where we have done research with that particular segment because we want to make our organization super aware of this situation. But there are problems because if you do behavioral segments that don't include empathy or aren't memorable or kind of bland or maybe really dry, then they don't work. I think the beautiful thing about personas, the Cooper style, is that you can empathize with them. And so you need, immediately, although there's also, if you're not very experienced about it, this ability to sort of tokenize or maybe think of somebody who's named Jennifer and or apply, kind of your own cognitive bias about her behaviors. So anyway, there's pros and cons about both, and I think it's super important to recognize what your team's abilities are.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the next section that I was thinking about was kind of naturally, so what was your persona creation process? And to start with, I think we'll go ahead and stick with you first, Indy, on this.
Okay.
So did you have slides on this, or?
I've got slides. There are like slide 12, it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. So,
yeah, there you go. Perfect. So my process is, and I think my process is only qualitative. The other example you're going to see is a little bit of quantitative and a little bit of qualitative. So I've never done anything that was super quantitative. It's all based on doing listening sessions with people. And listening sessions are very different than an interview. And that's a whole different subject. But what you see here in that, and yes, I'm capturing the data in a spreadsheet because my team they're usually dispersed, so we're not all in the same room. So we just get into a Google Sheet and we start putting our data together. We start with making a qualitative description of this person in first-person present tense after each listening session. Directly after. So we're capturing some of the thinking there. There's also a way that I do it where I'm capturing specifically thinking or reasoning, inner reasoning that people are going through. I'm capturing their reactions and I'm capturing their guiding principles, which means digging deeper than just the level of preferences, opinions, explanations, things like that. So we're getting pretty deep into it. And then we're spending some time, here we're doing it on a spreadsheet, that's this middle one. We're sort of like looking at what's unique per person that might match or come with another unique thing from another person. We're throwing out all of the universal thinking processes that people have because that can sort of drag you down and you can't find the groups. When I'm doing this in person with people, we're like scribbling all over whiteboards and maybe using some sticky notes, but we're trying to find affinities in terms of the inner reasoning, the reactions, and the guiding principles. And then you can see on that third thing, we come out with our thinking style segments, which are described. These actually represent the way people take care of their clothing. We were doing a study about that. For a manufacturer of washers and dryers, but we weren't studying how people do laundry. We were studying how people take care of their clothing. So it's a little bit broader, and you can see kind of in the names of these, and then you can read the descriptions. It's all very intense, very empathetic. You're walking in these people's shoes just by reading this stuff out loud because it's in first person present tense. And then my favorite part is the next slide, which is kind of more of a usage thing. But what I like to do, and this is sort of an example of some of the actual participants, is start to show how the demographics spread out. Especially in this case, the stakeholders were expecting all the personas to be around women, because women do all the laundry, right? So it was especially fun to go through this and talk about, this one thing could contain all sorts of different genders, different ethnicities, different ages, different levels of experience as well. So this is one of the things that I like to use it for, is to help the teams get past those assumptions that they have right up front.
Great. Yeah, and Paige, I think that you had some things to discuss as well with the personas from Weight Watchers.
Sure. So there were a couple of things that I kept in mind when I was planning the persona work. We were a new design team. We had not had personas at the company before. Like Nikki referenced, there was a consumer insights team that had developed more of a market segmentation. So personas had a couple of different values that they brought to the team. And one of the things that I thought was really critical for us when we were planning personas was to think about location and why you're talking to who you're talking to. Our team decided that it was really important for us to talk to our members in every region of the U.S. because when you think about healthy living, there are cultural components within each region that can bring challenges. And then when we thought about that, we also knew that we needed to look at what the data was telling us. And so this was a chance for design research and my product scientists, my data analysts to work together. We looked at the areas within each region that had the highest areas of growth, and we went out and talked to users in those areas. And then we also added a last stop, which was Mississippi. And Mississippi was not a particularly high growth state, but it is consistently one of the most obese states in the U.S. And so as you can imagine, there are some really unique challenges that people can face there. And we felt like it was important enough for us to go and interview and meet our members and see what the challenges were like that were in their lives in that state. And so location mattered. And then the other thing that was really important as part of the planning process is, and I think about this often, the journey in creating a persona can be just as valuable as the end product. So for my situation, we were a young, new design team. We didn't know very much about our members other than some market segmentation information. And we needed to better understand our members, and we needed to develop empathy for them. And the journey in creating the personas allowed us to get closer to that. It was really important for me to invite the team along in that creation process, to not have them be just a part of the synthesis, but to invite them into the prep, to invite them into the interviews, to invite them with me in visiting our members in their homes, and have them be part of that process from beginning to end. And that was incredibly valuable. I would argue just as valuable as the persona that we ended up with at the end. And the last thing that was really important was environment. So in creating your persona, you have to have an eagle eye. You have to be a key observer. There are such valuable nuggets that you can get from going and meeting a member or whoever uses your product, where they use your product, and observing the environment that surrounds them and noting how that environment influences the product that they're using. And so for something like weight loss and healthy living, there are a lot of emotional components that go into that, and a user, what they tell you and what they do can oftentimes be very different, and we know that as researchers. That's why we look at quantitative and qualitative research. But when you're in that environment and you're observing, you can see those pieces that tell a much deeper story. For us, we literally looked inside the refrigerator of our members. We asked them to do this, and it came after we had developed a relationship with them, and they were very comfortable with us. But that moment helped us get such interesting insights that we wouldn't have gotten if we had just interviewed them. It sometimes shed light on a contradiction. It oftentimes shed light on a challenge that our product was not helping them meet and conquer. And it really just added a much richer level to the work that we were able to do. So location mattered, bringing your team along for the entire process and being, looking at your environment and making that a key part of the interview process were really critical components in creating my personas.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and sneaking around in the background there. And Shwan, I'd love to hear about how the personas were created at Robinhood as well.
Cool, thanks. So there's a very brief overview of the product because I'm not really sure how many of you have heard of the product. Just very brief intro so that we have a context for what kind of product we're talking about. So basically, we allow you to trade stocks, options, and now cryptocurrencies in this app commission-free. So what it means is actually attract a lot of people who have no prior investment experiences. That's a lot of fun and brings a lot of challenging product questions. So in the app, you could log in, manage your portfolio, add things to watch list, and visit different stocks, and then do some research on them. Right? You can read news, you can read the charts, you can read the company fundamentals, and of course, you can buy and sell on the app. So this is the state of the app at the time when we did this persona research. I joined the company a year and a half ago, and this is literally one of the first research projects I worked on. So I think personas, to me, is always important. There's never, we should never question whether persona is necessary, but I think it's interesting to think about at what point at a startup company, for example, people start to think about personas. For us, it's when our product starts to, from being just one app that does one specific thing, to we're starting to think about we're going to have a suite of products, we're going to have web interface, we're going to have option trading instead of stock trading. We start to think about what success looks like and how do we think about our core user base. So how we approach this, so I wanted to add on a little bit about Nikki said. I think it's really, really cool that marketing people wanted to work with designers to refine marketing personas, but actually there could be two different sets of systems when you think about design personas versus marketing personas. If you think about the marketing personas is more for getting people into the door, use your product. Design personas is more, they're actually partly defined by how people are using your product. For example, people who engage a lot with the product versus people who don't. So that becomes another input you can use to enrich the user stories, and that is more for refining your product, defining your goals, and knowing what people need, what are people problems. How we approach this, I actually approached it from a more quantitative perspective in the very beginning, because I wanted to talk to users, but who to talk to? This is the first question I encounter. I wanted to have very good coverage for representative users, so I don't want it to kind of random sample people because that would take a very, very long time. So what I did is I basically clustered user data on 3 axes, right? If we ask what are the user data that really matters right now for Robinhood, we have one dimension of user data where we say users submit application, they have a lot of suitability data, demographic data, their net worth, their goal, their level of investment, expertise. And another axis of data, which is about their engagement data. How many times do they log into our app? What page do they visit most often, right? The other axis is trading data. Do people mostly trade blue chip stocks, or how many times do they trade? Do they make money or lose money, right? So there's 3 axes of data, and what we basically use is called k-mean clustering. In a very easy way to explain this is it basically group data in terms of how similar they are to each other. So we run this in R and then basically have 6 different clusters. Well, the key one of the challenges for doing k-mean clustering is deciding on the K, which is how many clusters you wanted to have. I don't want to go into too detail into the technical side, but you have to balance in terms of the size of cluster. If you don't have a cluster of 10 people, that's not really meaningful, right? If you have like 10 clusters, imagine if you have 10 personas, who's going to remember that, right? Remember, one of the reasons that we have personas, we wanted to have communicative powers. So there are a lot of things to balance. And then after we clustered all of our user base, we used a method called recursive partitioning. Basically, it produced a decision tree that lets you see what are the differentiators, what are the variables that would actually predict those different groupings. So for us, there's three things. One is account size, how many money people have in their account. The other is engagement, how much time people spend on our app. And then the other one is how much time they're actually looking at a stock page, which means how much time they're looking at doing research on a stock. So having all of that, we sampled from all those different clusters to make sure we have very good coverage for representative user data. And then we did in-depth one-on-one interviews. And we did around 20 people. I think we did, yes. And then in the end, we have 5 representative user personas that kind of have enriched stories of each of them. And right now, Robinhood have, we kind of have achieved company-wide awareness and visibility for all those personas. They have been informing our product roadmaps ever since. We go to the next slide. So those are the personas. I feel like I might want to just talk a little bit about what each of them means and the specific context. We gave them a name or label. So as Indy said, that we also try to avoid not to give a specific name or not to let people associate a specific gender or race. So our designers, actually, the creative director made all the visuals to label the personas. So we have nervous lurkers, which basically means new investors who signed up and hoping for some guidance, and then haven't really figured out how investment works. They probably tried once or twice and didn't work out, and they're kind of stuck, and they're very nervous, but they might be lurking the app. And then we have thrill seekers, who tend to be people who are fairly young and very risk-seeking and love to experiment different kinds of investment strategies. And eager learners are people who are also very new to investing, but very eager to learn about financial market and trading. So they spend a lot of time on the app and specifically doing research on the app. They don't necessarily trade a lot. And then you have long-term investors, people who have a lot of equity on our app, but don't really log in very often. So they probably are aiming for retirement or buying something that they can hold for a very long time. And then you have risky sandboxers, which is very interesting. If you only look at app engagement data, it's very similar to thrill seeker. They spend a lot of time, they do risky investment, but in fact, they are likely to be people who only do those risky behaviors on Robinhood. They tend to have a giant portfolio somewhere else where they consider, you know, like that's men investment. This is more for kind of experimental investment. So those are kind of the 5 personas we developed. Go to the next slide. And then we can roughly fit them into this behavior segmentations and informed by data if you look at account size and engagement data. So for example, thrill seeker and eager learners are very similar in terms of how much money they would like to have in the app and how engaged they are in the app. But what really makes a difference is thrill seeker just basically buy and sells a lot. But eager learners actually spend a lot of meaningful time looking into the app, reading news, and reading charts. Just very quickly go over this one. So when we communicate the persona research back to the team, of course, they will be full of quotes, examples, and I replaced this person's face with the persona had, but the goal of the persona is really trying to help your team understand in this person's real-life context, how does this person actually fit the use of a product in his life? So Mike, his goal is actually just reading about news and understanding how financial market works. This guy showed me tons of spreadsheet ever since he has started using Robinhood because he got so into researching, oh, this is how news and fundamental earnings is going to affect market change. He doesn't do a lot of trading. He only bought like biotech companies with $1,500 portfolio, but this is a type of user driven by the need of learning, which is a key insight for our team.
Great, perfect. Thanks, guys. So the next topic that I wanted to talk about is a really important ingredient in the whole mix of personas, and that is the team. And it has been mentioned here a few times tonight. And of course, as Kari mentioned, sometimes you have these eager team members who kind of run up to you and claim to want personas, but perhaps have a little bit of a myopic viewpoint of what exactly personas are. And also, on the other hand, you have team members that might be saying, boo, his persona is in the corner. So what I wanted to know was how you involved your team in the persona creation and how you perhaps converted some people who were perhaps a little negative towards personas, or at least got them to see your perspective. So Nikki, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Okay. I thought it was Paige.
It could be Paige, but Paige did actually talk a little bit about, kind of how her team was instrumental in the persona. So I thought,
because Paige and I are from the same company, so Paige and I didn't overlap. So she started V1 of personas, and then I came in and did V2, I guess you could say. The behavioral patterns that Paige's work really focused on was food behaviors, how people treated food, how they related to food, their emotions around food. So what I did when I came into Weight Watchers is added in the dimensions of activity and also social behavior that was involved in weight loss and health, but also outside of weight loss and health. And so now the title Jennifer represents multiple behavioral patterns depending on what part of the product you're designing for. So if we have a team that's trying to think about fitness and how to incorporate that into the journey, they can now look at each of these personas and see how the activity is interwoven into their food and social. They can see how these behavioral patterns start to overlap and intersect. So that's something I'm interested in asking Indy about, is when you have multiple behavioral segments, I forgot what you called them, do they rename them or what? I'd love to hear your perspective on that. But so to do that, we go do research like Paige said. I don't know if you guys want to hear more about that with the designers and the PMs and stuff.
Great, yeah, well, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you then, Indy, regarding the question that Nikki had just asked about that.
Yeah, so I'm used to call them behavioral audience segments, which is what they are, but that's a mouthful, so I've been calling them thinking style segments. The jury's out on whether that's going to fly. Yeah, to the question, one of the things that I think might be different between Cooper style personas and my segments is that I think mine are very contextual. So if you think about those laundry, well, I shouldn't call them laundry, taking care of your clothes segments, it changes based on context. There were two people who actually had kids, and their thinking styles changed after they had the baby, and they became more of the separationist because they didn't want germs to transfer over to the baby's clothes. I did a big project for an airline, and that one actually demonstrates this a lot better. We had 4 segments again, but it really differed based on, say, kind of your mood, what's happening. You could become somebody who's been totally frustrated by these delays and you can't get home to see your daughter's recital. That was one story we heard. Or you could be in a mode where you're actually going on vacation with that toddler, in which case you would behave totally differently. You know, let water run off your back a little bit more than if you were trying to get home to that toddler. And so one of the things that we do when we're using them is we try to look at the scenario, the context that we're in, the purpose that this person has, this immediate purpose, and then apply the different thinking styles to it. So which ones are very important in this scenario, or which ones apply, or which ones have something to do with what our business wants to make a difference with. Maybe we're focused on something that is maybe like smoothing out some of the valleys that a frustrated person has when there are flight delays. So, so it's kind of contextual a little bit. We're looking at it really based on the very immediate purpose. Does that make sense?
Great, yeah, and Shwen, so you had described the process of creating your personas, and I'd love to know how you involved your team with that process.
So as I said, this is actually one of the first foundational research that we did at Robinhood. So initially, including stakeholders was a challenge because nobody knew what I'm talking about. Why are we suddenly doing persona research? We involved the team pretty heavily in this research process because the very first question I asked myself is, I wanted to go ahead and help the team segment a user base and have a meaningful way to talk about them. But I wanted to first know among the teams that we have who interface users, what are their perceptions based on their knowledge about our user base? What is their perception of how would they categorize their user base to start with? Because in order to do the k-mean clustering, for example, you have to have input to your data model. What are the variables you put into the data are very, very important. And I wanted to make sure I include everything meaningful possible. So I go to two teams in specific. One is the data team because they deal with user data in an aggregated format on a day-to-day basis. So I asked the head of the data team, how would you describe or categorize our user base based on what you know, what your team know? And then I go to the support team, which is the team who handles all the tickets and customer support requests. They probably deal with a very specific subset of our user base, the unhappy kind. But their insights are also very important. I said, how would you categorize all the people who come to you for support? And then they have very different ways of categorizing our user base. For example, the data team people would be more based on, account size, just by intuition. I think people who have a lot of money there and who trade a lot have very different behaviors than people who don't have anything in the app yet, and engagement data. And then when we talk to support team, the very first thing the head of support said is that by experience, people who have tremendous amount of investment experiences come to us with very different questions than people who have no prior trading experiences. So, and I make sure to include the level of experience and engagement and account size and all of that in my data model. So in the end, I probably put way more variables than what I got from them, but I think talking to them gave me a head start for knowing where to look for meaningful data. That's one thing. The second thing I think is in the process, I think as Nikki and Paige talked about, involve your team, get them to observe your interviews. That's very, very important. Seek kind of a midpoint feedback. For me, what's very unique is that after the first circulation of research findings, I actually got the creator, our creative director, to design all those visuals for personas, which made a huge difference because the first version of this deck is just me trying to find internet images, which is not really memorable, and it's not Robinhood at all. But then I got him on board because of the first circulation of the research, and he actually designed all those really Robinhood-looking visuals, and right now is all over our office. So that's kind of how we incorporate the team in the process.
Great, great. So the next topic that I had in mind was kind of the question of, is there a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? So how exactly did your personas affect the product? So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys, Paige and Nikki, around the Weight Watchers personas. And I don't know which one of you wanted to begin, but.
Okay, so I'm going to pick on Jennifer just because you already know her a little bit. So this is an example of how a persona was helpful. First of all, our PMs and designers, when I asked them for feedback after the personas were introduced again, what they thought and what was most helpful, I think that journey map of how Jennifer changes over time was the most helpful for our designers and PMs, because then they could design the product to evolve with them as they progress in their journey. So with Jennifer, for example, her initial behavioral patterns around activity are very hesitant. It's something that she shied away from bad experiences that happened earlier on in her life when she tried to be active and experienced some peer pressure or negative feedback. So if you ask Jennifer at the beginning of her weight loss journey if she'd like to go do a 5K, that would be the worst idea possible for her at that moment, because that's not where she's at mentally. So what they help to do is show that you have to introduce activity at the right time in order for Jennifer to be able to best receive it and incorporate it in her life. And so we knew from lots of interviews and quantitative analysis that it took her about 1 to 3 months to learn the food program and really gain some confidence around her food choices and experience a 5 to 10% weight loss before she was able to even consider adding a new challenge such as activity into her routine. And then we also knew from the research how to introduce it. And we knew that for Jennifer, it was through friendships. Like the gateway to activity was through a person, and whereas the other pattern, the gateway to activity was through a class, a type of exercise. And for her, it didn't really matter what the type of exercise was. It mattered about that relationship. And so we needed to introduce her through relationship to activity. So one of the things that they've been working on designing, these are just 2 screenshots, is how to introduce that goal. We also know about how she's thinking about activity in terms of accomplishment. For Jennifer, it's about times per week, whereas the other persona, Vanessa, it was about intensity and hitting a certain amount of intensity for a certain amount of time. But for Jennifer, that would have not worked at all. And then introducing ideas to her through the stories of what other members had done. So she could click on Neighborhood Stroll and see and hear about the stories of members who had chosen that activity and why they liked it. And it's more suggestive and less prescriptive, which Jennifer needs this very calm, encouraging, here's things you could do without being told what to do, while other patterns want more, I just want to do high intensity 3 times a week. That's just tell me it, I'm going to commit to it, and we're good to go. So that's an example of how that conversation around which patterns you're designing for is so important, and how it's shaping our thinking around activity as Weight Watchers becomes a health and wellness app instead of just a food-based program tracking device.
Great, great.
Super quick question. This implies that you, like for Vanessa, there's a different app, is that, or like a slightly different content, is that right?
Oh, right. If they decided to target both. So Vanessa's needs are being met outside of the app more successfully. So I guess it led to an important internal conversation. Like if we want to target Vanessa's, we need to design a very awesome dashboard and become like a very fitness expert. And Weight Watchers decided not to invest in that direction. And so Jennifer's more suggestive because she's a harder target because fitness apps aren't targeted towards her. So if we can hit Jennifer, we're going to hit a target that's not, whose needs aren't currently being met better by other companies. And the fitness landscape is so competitive. Like you don't want to throw your hat in that ring unless you can really meet that bar.
Awesome.
Yeah. Paige, did you have anything to add to that?
I think Nikki covered most of it. And just in addition, like I mentioned earlier, for the V1, it was a lot about helping introduce the team to who our members were because they were new. We were all new to the company, and the company was new to user research. And so it was about us understanding better who our members were and about helping the company understand what the role of user research is within a company and how it can help product direction. And so that was a big component of that.
Great. And Shwen, how did your personas affect the product?
Yeah, I think I have a few slides. I think for me, I can think about maybe 2 things. One is very direct impact because every persona actually carries with it a unique set of people problems, right? So all of a sudden, now you can decide which problem you're like to have when you are planning your product roadmap, for example. So, for example, this is kind of just hypothetically, if you think about long-term investors and risky sandboxers are more mature type of investors than all the other three types, and now you can start thinking about the user journey of people using your product and how do you guide them to like a healthy path. Of course, user journey is probably another foundational research you have to do that's separate from persona. Persona is kind of take a snapshot, this is how our user differ today, and then that will evolve. But one thing is that suddenly, all of a sudden, you have a framework to talk about, for example, nervous lurkers. What is our key, what are their key pinpoints and how do we solve their problem? We wanted to know how to help them to develop interest in financial market. If they are interested enough to download the app, how can we help them more in guiding them in the process and gain more confidence? How can we make them less nervous than right now, right? And then if we go to the next slide, when we have eager learners, the problem here is eager learners is very interested in this problem space, but they don't have enough confidence to try out or develop their investment strategies. And then our key question is how do we build confidence for this group of people? And then for risky sandboxers, that would introduce a new set of questions. For example, well, how do we help those risky sandboxers to start see Robinhood as a serious, or how they phrase it, investment space, and maybe move some of their giant portfolio somewhere else to here, right? And then for long-term investors, maybe the question is, you don't log into the app very often, and how do we create another kind of affordance or engagement that you could do in the app versus besides just trading stocks? Maybe we could give you something else that keep you engaged, right? So all of a sudden you have a framework to start thinking about the problems that you want to solve for different group of people, and that would inform your product roadmap going forward. And there are actually examples, right? So when we developed the web interface, we realized that web is a great place for exploration, discovery, and research, and that is great for nervous lurkers and eager learners because now we can introduce recommendations, we can introduce discovery tools to help them to do research. When we launch option tradings and people can start talking about, well, option trading maybe it's more for, let's say, risky sandboxers, so not so much for eager learners. So you will be very conscious about, you got a head start when you are designing new product. All of a sudden, you don't have to reinvent all the wheels again. You know the people who you're designing for. It also helps the team to see what success looks like. For example, if we launch a new set of product, how do we know we succeeded? How do we know that we satisfy people's need? Well, then maybe thrill seeker is your target group, and you know what is the percentage of thrill seeker roughly in your user base, and maybe that should be the percentage of people using your option trading product. For example, I'm not really using our product not necessarily tied to our product, but you can start to define success based on how you understand the personas and how much you have in your user base. Yeah, the other impact I would say is very pervasive. I think this is a tool that really fundamentally helps people in the company develop empathy. So all of a sudden you will overhear the conversation in a design meeting where people say, well, this feature is really great for someone like long-term investor, but what about someone who don't even have a portfolio yet, like nervous lurker? All of a sudden that you have a way to communicate a lot of user data and that key user insights and incorporate it into your design thinking. It becomes part of your design vocabulary. So I think some of those impact is very pervasive. It's hard to spell it out, but I think persona has been loved by many people in the company. So I definitely think we have a success story here.
Great, great. So we are running low on time, but before we go, I really need to ask you guys what happened to the personas that you created, and of course, leave time for question and answer as well. But yeah, I just wanted, I guess, a couple of minutes to talk about, what happened in the end, some takeaways, some key takeaways that you can give these good people here, and yeah, just a kind of not really the ending of the story, but really, where the journey is now. So we'll go ahead and actually start with you, Xuan.
Actually, I don't have a summary, but I have a question, which is something I'm thinking about, which is I'm really interested to know or understand how to study the evolution of persona, for example. I think it's a question because as a product get more new users, at what point you would consider maybe I should redo this research and see whether there's new ways for segmenting user base in a meaningful way. So I was very interested to hear Paige and Nikki, because you guys have the research at different points in the company. So that would be an interesting story to share. That's just my question, I guess, because I don't want people to. Okay, maybe this is the thing I wanted to share. There will be a lot of people who come to you and ask you to label persona data. That's one of the challenge I had. Because I did it in a quantitative way in the beginning, people somehow think that there is a possible way to do a one-on-one matching between a user and a persona, and I think that's very wrong. One reason is that persona always evolves, and at this point, you might be an eager learner. The next point, you might be a long-term investor, for example. And then the type of persona will evolve too, right? For example, now we have crypto trading available. Who knows how that's going to change our overall user base, right? But the other thing is that there's no perfect one-on-one matching to the persona either. That's why in the beginning of the method slides, I try to visualize it to make people know that I didn't do the clustering to finalize the persona. The clustering is only one step in the research to say those are the reasonable sampling strategy you should try. But in the end, all those 5 personas, they might have overlaps in those clustering data. Like I cannot create a one-on-one matching. If you come and ask me how many of our users in the user base are nervous lurkers, I couldn't answer that question because nervous lurkers is a qualitative label I added to the data after talking to a set of users, which I think are very representative, but it's really hard to to help people to stay away from that tendency. But yeah, going back to the question for how we should reinvent, at what point we should reinvent personas.
Okay, I guess I'll talk. Agree. We get asked the same question. How many Jennifers are there? And I'm like, nope. I can't. I don't even know. Not even going to try. Like, go back to the market segment, and that might give you like a ballpark of, but it's not. That's not what they're used for. So the challenge that we're having right now. So Jennifer represents a weight loss journey, like over the course of years, and some patterns that are associated with that journey, right? And because Jennifer and the others have been so successful, this is my new problem. So we're getting into millennials, and they're like, okay, millennials need a persona set now. And teenagers need a persona set now. And men need a persona set now. And the UK and Germany and Australia. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where personas start to fall apart. I really feel like, because they can't, I just feel like that's the wrong tool, I guess, for what they're asking for, because there's, if we have 15 personas, then we're back to the same problem that we had in the beginning. Like, they only work if they're really, really distinct. And so what we're doing now actually is taking a shift towards India's approach, which is really interesting. So because they're so associated with Jennifer, they're convinced that millennials must be something different, even though a millennial can be Jennifer. So now we're shifting towards we didn't even know. We were calling them profiles for the time being because we're not even quite sure what the thing is, but it's more like, it feels similar to indie in that it's, think of this more as a way to travel through weight loss and less about here's the millennial, here's the man, here's the German, and all that kind of stuff. Because so that's what we're working towards now. So I have to go. I'm currently in the process of reworking them to be more like that, and then similar to like that slide Indy showed where she had those patterns, and then it showed the demographics moving more towards that approach, but as a broader like how you could journey through weight loss.
Awesome.
And I think
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think Nikki just shows that they have to evolve, and they're not static. And so the personas that we developed a few years ago wouldn't necessarily. They need to evolve, and they need to be composed of different things. And so the journey that Nikki's taking now, I think, is really interesting and important to showcase that the persona also doesn't have to die with you as a researcher. That they can stay alive and they will move and grow.
One of the things that I did for that airline is sort of a nice little short case study. I'm trying to encourage people to reach out and do some of this kind of research once a year or once every other year so that you're gathering more data based on where your organization is headed, because organizations change strategy and direction all the time. So one of the things that we did with we did 8 different studies with the airline over time based on different initiatives that they were interested in, and just kept gathering that data. We were making mental model diagrams, but we were also making these thinking segments. And so I'm trying to encourage organizations to reach out and do this, just like what you're saying, to have them evolve because your strategy is different. And millennials, hey, let's not think of them as a demographic, but let's go do some research with them included and see how their thinking compares to, say, Jennifer.
Great. Okay, well, I would love to thank each of our panelists for a great panel tonight. Thank you. And I would love to open up the floor for a few questions. And if someone could just keep me on time, and I'm just going to run back and forth with my mic. So.
Hi, I'm Ellen Francic, and I work in robotics. So, yay, woo, robots. So one of the questions I have, one of the challenges I've had is these stories are very powerful, but you're dealing, you are dealing with existing products or maybe somewhat more understood industries. But if you have a case where both your product definition and your persona/market definition are intertwined and evolving together, how would you adapt your method for really uncovering personas?
I totally, when I work with my clients, a lot of them are kind of on that edge where they're trying to figure out what the definition of this area is. So what I try to do is step away from the product itself and look at the person's purpose. So when I'm gathering data, and again, what Juan was doing was sort of trying to figure out who to look at based on sort of quantitative of what existed. Sometimes that doesn't exist. So when I'm gathering data, I'm looking for a certain subset of what that particular, like your robotics, right? There's probably some subset and then some subset within that. Go out and ask those people what their purpose might be without having robots in place. So just to throw something out there, maybe these are robots for cleaning floors because, those exist. So maybe that's not a good example, but you wouldn't ask people about using a robot to clean their floors, but you would ask a person about, keeping their house clean. And that could include a lot of different things. Or maybe it's not even a house. But it could include a lot of different things. It's a larger purpose, and it's a kind of a purpose that someone 100 years ago had as well. So you can measure it that way and say, well, what kind of a purpose could I have asked my great-grandmother or great-grandfather, and then go around and ask that and see kind of how that frames the ground around that particular subset.
Okay.